The Nicrew HyperReef is one of the more popular budget LED lights for a reef tank, and they've recently released their Gen 2 with a number of enhancements that they say improves the spectrum, spread and mounting options. So today I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about it, and I'll share my experiences with you after 2 weeks use. Before we get into that though, it's disclaimer time. Nicrew have paid me to make this video and they've sent me the light for free. I'm actually still free to say whatever I want, both good and bad, and Nicrew don't get to see the video before you do, nor do they get any input into the content. But at the end of the day, I've been paid to make the video, so make of that what you will. There are 3 sizes available for the HyperReef: a 100 watt which costs $250 and is rated to cover a 24-inch square, a 150 watt that costs $320 and is rated at 30 square inches, and a 200 watt that is rated for up to 36 inches square and comes in at $400. And for comparison, the $250 100 watt is equivalent in power to the $500 Radion XR15, and the $400 200 watt is roughly equivalent in power to the $1000 Radion XR30. I have the 150 over my 22-inch square Cade Nano tank, but that's overkill and the 100 would be the better choice for a tank of this size. It's currently only available in the US, but I'm told it will follow in other markets, including the UK and Europe, in the coming months, and I'll add a link in the description when it's available in Europe. Nicrew claims a broad lighting spectrum with 8 separate colour LEDs, and they've gone for a 120-degree wide-angle lens, which is also nicely frosted for a more diffused light. And if you want more intensity and less spread, you can buy a 90-degree narrow-angle lens kit separately. But unless your tank is SPS dominated, the standard 120-degree lens is probably the way to go. Now, I've already done an unboxing on my second channel, but briefly, in the box you get the light itself and a really solid mounting bracket, which instantly sets it apart from the more premium LED brands in our hobby, almost all of whom sell the mounting brackets separately for an extra $100 or so. You don't get a controller with the light, so you will need to buy that separately. The light does work without the controller, and you can choose between 7 presets by pressing the button on the top of the light, but the functionality is really limited, so it's well worth spending the extra $50, and I'll show you the controller in a minute. And finally, there's a spare USB-C port at the back of the light, so you can daisy chain several of these lights together and run them all off of one controller. Installing the light with the included mount was really easy and took literally seconds. All you have to do is rest the mount on your glass, then tighten a couple of plastic bolts, and you're done. Now, some light mounts can sag a little under the weight of the light, but the Nicrew is rock solid and I bet it won't sag at all, even long term. The mounting kit is actually really clever and lets you install the light in various different ways. I chose the option that lets it sit flush to the wall because I think that looks the neatest, but the downside of that option is that it is fixed in height at 12 inches off the water surface. I actually like mounting lights high up, so that works for me, and the mount is still adjustable for depth, so you can move the light forward or backward. But if that's not for you, the mount can also be fitted in 2 different ways for rimless tanks that do allow the height to be adjusted, and it can even be installed on a tank with a Euro brace. The mount has a hole at the top for the cables to exit out of, which means they are mostly hidden, and the only thing I don't like about the mount is that the front part looks like it should have an end cap on it, but I think we can all agree I'm in the territory of nitpicking there. With the mount in place, I think the light looks really smart over my tank, and the only thing I'll say is that the Nicrew seems to have taken inspiration from Ecotech in terms of the design, and it looks a lot like the Radion XR15. A little too much in fact for my liking, and I would prefer it if Nicrew came up with a more unique design, but I suppose imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. When I connected the controller then, it loaded the stock profile to the light. That was far too white a spectrum for my personal taste, and even with the light mounted so high, I was getting way more PAR than my LPS corals can tolerate. So I would like Nicrew to include more templates as standard with the controller, as I think the stock template will be too strong for most buyers, especially those who mount the light lower. However, it only took 5 minutes of fiddling around with the colour channels to get it looking better to my eye, and I ended up with the violet and blue peaking at 40%, with red, white and green channels all at 5%, and I have a ramp up and down at the end of each day with only the blue channel. The controller is basic, but it is pretty easy to use, and Nicrew has made a how-to video guide that shows you how it works. I would prefer a mobile app, but for the price I can't really argue, and it's certainly not a deal breaker. From what I understand from other reviews, the Gen 1 controller was a weak point and lots of people used the Kessel controller instead. But while I didn't ever use the Gen 1 controller myself, I found the Gen 2 controller to be really easy to use, so I wouldn't expect people to buy the more expensive Kessel controller. The schedule I set brings out the pop in my corals without being too blue, and there's still a good amount of white light, even with the white channel set to just 5%. And I think this is a better starting point for most people, and you can just increase the white channel a little if you prefer a whiter look to your tank. Now in terms of power output, I didn't see the point of seeing what the maximum output is because everybody will have different light settings, different mounting heights and different sized tanks. So instead of testing its maximum output, I tested how it got on my tank with my settings, which I think is potentially a more real world example. I was shooting for a low peak PAR with even spread, which is basically what I got. Across the back of the tank at the top, the PAR was between 100 and 120. Halfway down the tank, I got 130 by the glass, where the light reflects back off the glass, and around 80 in the centre, and everywhere else in the tank was between 60 and 80. While those numbers are quite low, you can obviously get more juice by turning the intensity up or lowering the mounting height, but my takeaway from the PAR test is that the 120-degree lens gives good spread at the expense of not being especially powerful, which will be good news for most people except for SPS keepers, who as I say can just buy the 90-degree lens kit, which will increase PAR at the expense of a bit of spread. Turning to Shimmer, and I think the Nicrew does pretty well too. It's fairly gentle and looks pleasing to the eye. It does look a tiny bit staticky if you look up close, but it's totally fine and doesn't have any nasty colour separation, so there's none of that disco ball effect. Now, as long-term followers of the channel will know, I am a massive shimmer junkie, and the Nicrew doesn't give the kind of shimmer you get from Kessel's, Red Sea, or the budget-friendly Aquanite V2. And instead, the Nicrew shimmer is probably comparable to most other lights on the market, like Radion's. I am going to mark the Nicrew down though because I wasn't able to tune the colour to the way I really like it. The blue channel controls both blue and royal blue, and you can't adjust those colours separately, which means it looks a tiny bit too Windex for my personal tastes, and you don't get the full-on ultra fluorescence you would do if you could set it to 100% royal blue and 0% blue. And that nuclear style fluorescence is really important to me personally. But with that being said, I am a lot more fussy than most people when it comes to LED lights, and if you're new to the hobby, you won't even notice that. Ultimately, the blues still make my corals look great, and I suspect some people may even actually prefer the more subtle glow. It's also worth noting that the white channel controls both warm white and cool white LEDs, and the violet controls both the violet and ultraviolet LEDs, so you can't separate any of those either. If you're a beginner, that makes things more simple and is probably better, but if you're more advanced, you might have preferred the additional control. Now, with the intensity set to the low levels I chose, I find the cooling fan is off for more than half the day, but it does come on fairly regularly. It's semi-quiet, but in my small room, I actually find it a little annoying. If a fan is on permanently, you tend to zone it out into the background, whereas you notice it more if it starts and stops like the Nicrew does. But I probably only notice that because this is my quiet room, and for comparison, the fan is a little quieter than my Red Sea lights, and probably only marginally louder than my Kessel's. And ultimately, if you want a truly silent light, you'll need to find something without a fan. With all that being said, I have included a quick clip of the fan noise, but it's really difficult to accurately represent noise levels on YouTube, so please take what you're about to see with a pinch of salt. All in all then, I think the HyperReef Gen 2 is a really impressive light. It's not in the same league as the Kessel's or Radions, but if you're on a budget, it really is a compelling option and offers excellent value for money. And while the price has crept up a little on the Gen 1, it's a much more professional package than any of the other budget lights I've seen. And finally, if you're wondering if I'm going to stick with this light after the review, I'm afraid the answer is no. My lighting setup costs 3 times as much as a Nicrew, so it probably won't surprise you that it's better, and in particular the colour, shimmer and spread are exactly what I'm looking for, perfect to my tastes, and I wouldn't change them for any other light on the market. If you've got any questions I haven't answered, then let me know in the comment section below, and if you enjoyed the video, give me a thumbs up and subscribe for next time, and until then, happy reefing.